Would you like to see some more of Judyth Vary Baker? Okay. Well, she has something she's going to share with us. So we're going to change the schedule a little bit again. We're still waiting, I believe, for Robert Groden.
I don't know.
So in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to bring up Judy, and she's going to do a presentation entitled Fables Before and After the Exhumation of Lee Harvey Oswald. Ladies and gentlemen, help me bring up with a warm welcome, Judyth Vary Baker.
I don't have any room in my car. Yeah. I'll get you that. This is Monday night. Okay. Oh, I can't leave my clip unattended. Yeah.
Hello? Oops. All right, now that everybody's scared to death. Oh, this has good sound though, yeah. Okay. There are some legends out there, and because of the legends, people have gotten the wrong idea about Lee. And anybody who's come in now, you're going to hear some stuff that the ones that didn't get here on time aren't going to hear. First of all, the legend is about like Lee Oswald was such an antisocial person. And I'm going to tell you something, that wasn't his nature. You look at his photographs and you'll see, except when he was arrested, you'll see him smiling and just so, he's the cutest little boy, but he was, you see him smiling and look at the photos. Now here's something that Marguerite Oswald said. I'm sorry, her sister Lillian said. She said, you know, I don't like how they have thought that. She was talking about the smirk, this famous smirk. She said his mouth was just like that. But they act like there was some kind of crazy smirk that he was making, like, oh boy, I just love killing Kennedy. You know, so she noticed that he had this odd smile. I always thought of it as like a key cat. Okay, anyway, that's the way I felt. All right, now here's one of the legends that really gets to me. Every once in a while we find an article that has popped up, especially John Armstrong does this. He has found some great files of people and they say that was Lee Oswald. But most often it is a file they find where it talks about that Mr. Oswald would help buy Jeeps or whatever. First of all, we have somebody here who's from New Orleans here. And I know we've got a couple. They may not in this room right now. But to make a long story short, there are files that we believe, at least I've been convinced by several people, and also by something that Lee said, that he was being protected, that when he came back to the United States, he wouldn't get arrested because they would like claim that he had been in the USSR, and he'll say no. And he would be able to point to something that showed that he had lived here. I believe that some of the records that we find that looks like he was here and then he was actually in the Soviet Union at the same time, that when he came back, remember, something very odd happened. Lee Oswald was not arrested when he returned to the United States, even though publicly he said he was renouncing the United States, and he even said publicly that he would put on a uniform and fight against the United States if necessary. By the way, as he's speaking, I'm going to renounce my citizenship and all, and even sign the papers. He never finished the papers, never allowed them to be officially accepted. There are other things that show that this is all fake. And I was telling, he got a State Department loan, which it says in small print can only be for citizens in good standing. And the other thing about that, and maybe I talked about it already, but you had this application form to fill out. Oh, your name, your address, and where you've lived, and your kids, and whatever it is, right? And he filled out some of it. but he didn't fill out anything. It said, what were you doing in the USSR? It's blank. And yet they give him a State Department loan. It's the height of the Cold War when he won't tell the State Department what he was doing in the USSR for 30 months. He's one of ours. He just had to be. All right, now, so I'm going through some of the legends because the idea is that this man was, they weren't trying to say, oh, he went to the Soviet Union, he didn't like it, he came back to the United States, didn't like that either. And that Marina said he wouldn't want to live anywhere except on the moon. He wouldn't be satisfied with anything except living on the moon. Well, that's the way that went. Interestingly enough, somebody mentioned that he was frail when we had this interview going on, and I think you heard Larry Rivera say, no, he saw abs on him, and boy, he had them. All right, so now that's not going to show up in an autopsy photo where all your blood is poured out of your body into your abdomen. All your muscles there, you're going to look flabby. Some of you look horribly flabby and thin and like frail or whatever. Now, you're going to pump your muscles up, to get your muscles looking good. That's but you've got to work it up, to get it nice and firm. Well, you can't if there's no blood in them. And that means also your face. The people who say that wasn't Lee Oswald because the face looks so strange. Mr. Grudy, we had a mortician working on him, and he glued his lips together. I'm talking about gross things right now, but it has to be done. We've had so many legends that were made that they had to exhume Lee Oswald to find out if it was a real man that was buried, all right? It was, I'm telling you right now, it was Lee Oswald. It wasn't anybody else. Now, but Mr. Grudy, he said, wait a minute, his head was severed. His head was severed when we pulled him out. It wasn't. It just looked that way because it rolled way far away, but it was actually still attached by tendons underneath and everything. It's just that that's what happens. Mr. Grudy had, I don't know how many bodies he'd seen that had already partially mummified either, because there's adipose, it's an adipose type reaction. It turns fat into it's a saponification process. And semi-mummification happens in the presence of no oxygen and having sufficient moisture. And so he said, I know that his head was, he had an autopsy, and you have this cut line, this here where you can open up the brain, open up the skull and take the brain out and all this kind of weigh it and so on. And he said he didn't have that, can't be him. But actually, if you look, you can actually see some of the lines, okay? You have to look very carefully. But most of it's been covered up with this like fatty, waxy stuff. So it stuck it all together. So that's why it didn't fall apart. In the autopsy, they had to sever those tendons in order to do everything with it, because the body was pretty well, in pretty bad shape and all that. The fact at the funeral that he didn't look like this because all the blood had been drained out and they did not put enough embalming fluid back in him, okay, to puff him up properly, I guess because they hated him because they thought he killed the president. So he wasn't very well, he wasn't filled with any very much as much embalming fluid as he should have. Now they can get away to say they did everything right by him. The doctor said they did everything right by him, but when he's mortally wounded and every minute counts, they rolled him first into trauma room 1, but they pulled him out again and took him to trauma room 2 because they were not going to treat the man who shot Kennedy in the room where Kennedy died. So several minutes, very important minutes, were lost there. There are a lot of people who believe that the Lee Oswald, that there were 2 of them. And in most of these cases, this goes back to the idea that John Armstrong had, that the man that Harvey, he calls Harvey, okay, was born of a Hungarian family. Now, God has his ways of handling things when we want the truth to come out. I was born into a Hungarian family. So when I'm talking to so-called Harvey, who was really Lee, who hated his middle name Harvey, and that's why he usually did Lee H. Oswald. Even when he wrote Harvey, you could hardly read it. It looked like Henry half the time, and he actually got filed that way once. So when we have that kind of thing going on, John Armstrong said, I see this anonymous phone call, and it came from New York, and it said that the real Oswald's parents, you know, it was the father and an uncle in New York, and they were Hungarian, that Harvey Oswald, you know, was raised in a Hungarian family and knew fluent Russian because he lived in a Hungarian family. Now think about this for a minute. My grandmother, who was fluent in German, and she was in, of course, English, Polish, Czech, and Italian, hated the Russians because of their becoming communists and all that, because our relatives, some of them in the Russian Revolution, in the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, actually were, some of them were shot and killed. And the other thing is, if he was born into a Hungarian family, he should have known Hungarian, right? He didn't know a word of Hungarian, not one. He didn't even know Kusanim. That's, anybody goes to Budapest, the first word you learn. He didn't know a thing. And he knew how to eat Hungarian food very well. I cooked it for him, palacita, tuda kavasta, you know, paladicibus kavasta, all these things like that. Nukadli, Ishtats. Okay, so I'm telling you, he didn't know what any of that stuff was. And maybe you guys don't know either. So you're on the same level mostly with Lee Oswald. So there's so much for being born into a Hungarian family, as Armstrong tries to claim. The other part of that story is that if he's taken away at age 3 by this fake Marguerite who didn't know a word of Russian, how come Armstrong claims he knew fluent Russian? What, from age 3? Come on, really? As a matter of fact, he says that Robert Oswald had a picture of Harvey and one of Lee in the same house, and that he had to know the truth. And he's got a whole list of people like that. However, how is it that the Lee, we have plenty of letters that Harvey wrote to his fake mother. We don't have a single letter that the Lee sent to his supposedly real mother. Then Lee told me something, and this is the last part. I'm not here to spend a lot of time wasting your time. But imagine, if you will, excuse me, imagine, if you will, you have a young man, and he's wants to go to the USSR and be a spy and all that kind of thing. And he says he's going to visit his mother, and he's going to take care of his mom. He's there for 3 days, and then he goes to New Orleans and leaves. He's over there for 30 months, comes back with a wife and child without any problem. But wait a minute, where were the reporters? How come they didn't show up? They didn't show up because, as Lee explained to me, he had to keep real quiet for a while and work for Leslie Welding and all that, and pay off, especially pay off his loan that showed that it was on the books. And so he paid that off as fast as he could. And from then on, he was always saying all his job applications, he came straight from the Marines. Now, I just want to tell you one thing. I have brought with me the Armstrong book, the John Armstrong book. I have it. There aren't that many around. They're expensive too. My book, everywhere where there's a mistake, I have marked it, or where there's a problem with what this repetition. You keep saying the fat or the heavy set, the short Marguerite, and the one that Lee told me that he was so surprised to see what his mother looked like when he came back, because she was losing her looks real fast. He said she had a thyroid condition. Back then, they didn't often treat thyroid very well. That changes the face, makes it thicker and more coarse. We have plenty of photos showing as she, got aged, what happened. He says that she was shorter. He shows a photograph, and I have it on Facebook page. It's called Harvey and Lee, Truth Mingled with Fiction. because he shows a picture of Marguerite in slippers, the fat, short one, okay? With a Marguerite that was several years younger, I mean, 10 years younger, okay, or anywhere about in there, about 10 years younger, in high heels. But he's got it set up so it looks like, okay, that one is taller than the other. Then he says that Marguerite was, shorter than Marina Oswald, who was 5'2" or 5'3" at the most. We were the same height, Marina and I. And that he says that Marguerite was at least 1.5 inches shorter than Marina. But he does this when Marguerite's passport is out there and it shows that she was 5'5", okay? 5'7", somewhere in there. Anyway, it was inches above what he said. It was 1.5 inches above what he said. I will show anybody who wants to look at that John Armstrong book, because it's filled with all kinds of corrections, page upon page upon. I'm going to bring it tomorrow. You got to see it to believe it. I could show you the problems in that book. And how did he get away with this? Well, he showed various pictures of Lee Oswald, and some that had been altered, and some that were snapshots, and the camera did not like Lee Oswald. Now, some people in photography, you know that some of us take good pictures, or we'll just have one side of our face to have the picture taken because it looks better. You actually, one side of your face is not quite exactly the same as the other side. A lot of people don't know that. So what I'm just saying is in Lee Oswald's case, at a different angle, his nose would look wider. If the light was a different way, it just looked wider, especially when he was a kid. If he opened it, if he yawned, his whole face changed differently. And anyway, I've noticed these things as an artist. By the way, I want to thank the wonderful person, I'm not going to name her name, but who I have almost finished the painting for her. And we always, every year, I have to say that these $6,000 or $7,000 paintings, I only can do about one a year because of my eyes. I used to do a lot more, but I always give at least half of that to the conference and more if I can. And so we did get the payment this year, and this woman has helped me tremendously because it's been pretty rough this year. The Dallas City Hall and all that charges a lot of money this time for our remembrance ceremony. So I'm going to say everybody's here now, so now I can say bye. Okay.